I started off this year waking up in the bustling streets of Tokyo. When I wanted to go to Kamurocho to go see Kiryu Kazuma, I hopped into a cab and went straight there. Throughout the ride, I indulged myself in a conversation with the cab driver. As a cunning linguist, I was able to riz the traditionally introverted Japanese cab driver with my atrocious, borderline war criminal level Japanese. We talked about politics, and he told me lots of interesting things regarding Japanese politics. It was an eye-opening 8 minutes ride there, and as I explored the streets of Shinjuku, where I was accosted by a random black dude who may or may not be a member of the Nigerian mafia, I thought to myself, I should make this video. Welcome back to the Based Indonesian Show, where we showcase to you Japanese politics in through the eyes of a weeb. You see, I'm something of a Japanese connoisseur myself. I like all things Japanese, you name it, from anime, manga, sentais, to AVs. If it ain't Japan, it ain't grand. Japanese politics is a subject I rarely touch for how boring the issues are. It's either about Shinzo Abe encouraging people to copulate, or how their constitution is lame, or, China being China. All in all, what's important to note about Japan is how most of the people inside Japanese politics are old as frick. Joe Biden would fit right at home amongst the rotting pediatrics of the Japanese diet. And this is an issue where a lot of Japanese youths feel like they're underrepresented within the Japanese politics. This is a total reversal from Indonesia, where there are a staggering amount of young politicians. I guess here the younger you are, the better. Looks like Boss Baby's not out of the truth. Anyways, let's start talking about Japanese politics, shall we? The state of Japan is a unitary parliamentary constitutional monarchy, which means a unitary parliamentary constitutional monarchy, God, that's a mouthful, is a government system where political power is centralized at the national level. The executive branch is accountable to the legislature, and a monarch serves as the ceremonial head of state under the framework of a constitution that defines the powers and responsibilities of government institutions and protects the rights of its citizens. Basically, the Prime Minister is accountable to the Japanese Parliament, or called the Diet of Japan, and reports directly to the Emperor, who's not allowed to do but to protect the rights of the people under the Constitution. Japan has adopted this form of government since 1946. Back then, Japan was the same, but the reality was much more different. When Japan was an empire, power rested in a group of old geezers who form an oligarchy to control the government. Japan always had dreams of becoming a European country, and so they did what every European country was good at: colonization and imperialism. Alas, Japan's imperial ambitions were thwarted because the Europeans and Americans thought Japan can never be like them, which is to be white. So in World War II, Japan was the last man standing in the Axis powers, and thus was subjected to the events of the movie Oppenheimer, which led to their surrender. Nowadays, Japan hasn't really changed much. The old farts still control the government, but they can't do much, the emperor can't do much, and nobody can do much. So let's divide the basics into three. You have the constitution, you have the emperor, and you have the prime minister and the diet. That's actually four. But let's count the prime minister and the diet as the same thing. The constitution of Japan used to be much more different than this. The historical Meiji Constitution was Prussian, which probably explained why Japan was hell-bent on armies and why they were so obsessed with dominating their neighbors. This obsession with becoming literally Prussia peaked in World War II, where Japan learned that picking a fight with a huge-ass country across the Pacific who controls most of their oil and has a terrifying industrial might would be a bad idea. And because Japan loves the sun so much, America harnessed the power of the sun and gave it to Japan twice. Alas, Japan gave up because they didn't want to figure out if America had more than 2 atomic bombs. But 226,000 deaths is a good price to pay for the existence of anime, am I right, guys? America occupied Japan and used their own constitution as a template for the new Constitution of Japan in 1946. Unlike the oppressive and militaristic Prussian model constitution that emphasizes the emperor's power, limited suffrage and democracy, and enabled an oligarchy to control Japan through the appointment of nobles and high-ranking officials, the new American model constitution was much more merciful. It safeguarded democracy, reduced the emperor into a mere figurehead, and gave importance to representative democracy. The Prime Minister and the Cabinet was responsible to the Diet. And most importantly, the brand new Constitution is white-pilled. It contained Article 9, whereby Japan renounces war as a sovereign right of the nation and prohibits Japan from maintaining a military capable of offense. The TLDR version of this is basically Japan is now the 52nd state of America, following the 51st state, which is Puerto Rico, and preceding the 53rd state, which is Israel. As a result, Japan is virtually defenseless, relying on America to guard its borders until 1954. Japan formed the Japanese Self-Defense Force, or shortened the JSDF. But the JSDF rarely faced normal conventional threats and was only useful at combating the multitude of kaijus threatening Japan. Returning to the topic, Japan's constitution created a framework where representative governance is the norm. The Constitution empowers the people of Japan to make their own decisions relating to statehood. And in that form, the Japanese Diet plays a huge role in deciding policies, laws, and edicts that Japan will take. Japan in this regard is a parliamentary democracy, but only in practice. In reality, Japan has been a one-party state, no different than China. The party that controls Japan is the Liberal Democratic Party, or the Jiminto. Despite their left-wing naming convention, the Jiminto are actually conservatives. Perhaps they must take an inspiration from the emasculated political parties of Europe. The Jiminto has controlled the office of the Prime Minister and the Cabinet since 1955, but because they want to maintain the facade of democracy and change. Just for formality, you know, because you can't run a democracy if the same party keeps on ruling the country. Seriously, the number of Jiminto prime ministers is staggering. It might as well be a one-party state. The term used to describe this is called the 1955 system. However, true to the textbook, the Japanese Diet is split between the government and the opposition. Most of the seats are controlled by a coalition between the Jiminto and the Buddhist Democratic Komeito, while other parties control the opposition. Now, the Prime Minister of Japan and his cabinet answer to the Diet, and their duty is to form policies, execute laws, and to create measures against a Godzilla attack, and to properly dispose of his body when they eliminate him so he doesn't become an environmental issue. But in practice, the Prime Minister and their cabinet leads the one-party state of Japan and the Liberal Democratic Party of Japan. On a good note, the LDP are not as socially conservative as one might think. They are barely liberal in the American sense, and were more in line with classical liberalism that mostly affected economic practices. They weren't as ideological and are more grounded by common interests and coordination as opposed to the confrontative nature of its American masters. We talked about the Constitution, the Prime Minister, and the Diet, but how about the actual head of the state, the Emperor? The office of the Emperor of Japan has existed long before the Roman Empire was a thing. The first Emperor of Japan is Jimmu, who launched the military campaign from Hyuga to Yamato. Jimmu is said to be the descendant of both Amaterasu and Susanoo, both names that you might recognize from watching Naruto, but which, mind you, they were actually siblings. Japan had a thing for incest even before hentai, but gods in every part of the world lived above human morality, so it's normal. After capturing Yamato, Jimmu decided he wanted to be like one of those Chinese emperors, made himself emperor, and thus began Japan, or Wa, which means dwarf, which is offensive to Japan. The truth is a bit complicated. You see, the text about Jimmu came from Nihon Shoki, which was half fictional, so Jimmu probably didn't exist. Or they could exist, but the entire details of Jimmu from the book are probably a self-insert fanfiction version of the actual Jimmu to spice up sales. Nevertheless, the current Emperor Reiwa, or his common name, Naruhito, claim descent from this ancient superhero. The Japanese imperial family is the House of Yamato, and they are the longest reigning royal family in this world. The Japanese emperor acts as the political, spiritual, and cultural leader of Japan for millennia. In fact, the supremacy and sacredness of the emperor is so ingrained in the Japanese national psyche that a rebellion against the emperor and seizing the throne was unthinkable. Instead, ambitious nobles from families like the Fujiwaras and the Tairas fought over the right to have their daughters marry the emperor and gain power that way. And so over time, the emperor's rule over Japan decreases, from powerful, godlike absolute rulers to mere figureheads. After World War II, Emperor Showa or Hirohito renounced the imperial family's divinity in public but sneakily made a sacrifice to his ancestors, Amaterasu. I see what you did there, Hirohito. Nowadays, the emperor acts only as a spiritual leader. The emperor's role as spiritual leader entails engaging in extensive, meticulous, precise rituals which can become exceedingly tedious and repetitive, much like this line I'm currently reading right now. This monotony was so overwhelming that prior to the Meiji era, emperors frequently chose to abdicate long before their natural deaths. In fact, many reigns were relatively short, resulting in successors being crowned at a very young age, some as young as 6 years old. It was likely because of this reason that Emperor Heisei, or Akihito, made the historic decision to abdicate in late 2017, passing the throne to his son Naruhito on April 30, 2019. Also, Japanese emperors like to make a distinction from eras preceding them. It is for this reason that Japanese emperors tend to have an era name that they receive after ascending to the throne. So far, it is commonly accepted that Meiji, Taisho, Showa, Heisei, and Reiwa are their own eras, while eras preceding it were lumped into a single period of historical significance that overlaps with the emperor's eras. The Sengoku period, for example, isn't called the Ogimachi period or the Go-Yozei period. Another interesting thing to note is that Japanese emperors have the same naming conventions. Naruhito's father is Akihito, his grandfather is Hirohito, his great-grandfather is Yoshihito, his great-great-grandfather is Mutsuhito, his great-great-great-grandfather is Osahito, his great-great-great-great-grandfather is Ayahito, his very first ancestor that had this name is Takahito. So you see that the Japanese imperial family is a long-running thing, and things doesn't look like it's going to end soon, much like the Fast and the Furious movie series. Only time will tell which one of the two will be left standing at the end of it. The Japanese have a sort of live and let live sort of mentality towards politics and politicians. Politics, and especially the imperial family, are not quote-unquote fair game like in Western politics. There are little to no political jokes in Japanese media because of how indifferent people are to politics, and the Japanese have a simple mindset regarding politics. Politicians are expected to do their job, and if they are corrupt, the Japanese are mostly apologetic, thinking that it is in a politician's nature to be corrupt. Take notes, Indonesian politicians, move to Japan. But Japanese politicians are expected to resign after a Also take notes, Indonesian politicians, maybe you can learn one thing or two from Japanese politicians. I think it's a sign because Japan is already a politically and economically stable country. There are less insecurities because of how advanced Japan's society is compared to the likes of Indonesia, where everyone is hyper-political. It is also considered taboo in Japanese society to make fun of, criticize, or even discuss the imperial household in public. Before America, discussions or criticisms against the emperor was criminalized. And in post-war Japan, right-wing groups and political extremists often terrorize people who continue to criticize or discuss the emperor. And thus, it was considered social taboo to talk about the emperor. But I can talk about it because I'm not Japanese. But I feel like back then it was a way to avoid discussing the awkwardness of Hirohito's war crimes, since most of the war crimes he was complicit on were tossed to other war criminals, absolving him of any guilt. Public media outlets such as magazines and television broadcasts often have to self-regulate themselves to avoid this taboo, leading to criticism or discussion against the emperor and his family to be treated as a taboo in mass media. This is called the chrysanthemum taboo, like the flower. And the attitude surrounding this taboo extends even to politics themselves. The debate and discussion in Japanese politics are rarely confrontational or explicit. People would avoid discussing the negative side of politics and Japanese politics, mostly relating politics to what they feel as a person. That's why politics in Japan is not mainstream, and younger voters increasingly courted by politics in order to speak out more about politics. But many young Japanese people are also disappointed by Japanese politics. Because of the disproportionate number of geriatrics in politics, young Japanese people feel that politicians do not represent or care about them. There's a lack of age representation in Japanese politics, and Japan's ban on student-organized political organizations helped to aggravate this issue. Meanwhile, the youths of Japan prefer to party, get drunk, or to live life like it's a GTA LARP session, ignoring that they are a major component to a national problem: depopulation. Japan is facing a major population crisis, and it has responded by opening up the immigration floodgates because Japanese Zoomers refuse to work in factories or other low-skilled jobs. Japanese people are better than that. And while Shinzo Abe has been furiously campaigning for more younger Japanese to get hot, heavy, and hitched before he was whacked in a drive-by, the Japanese are completely missing out the solution to the issue, which is to ban contraceptives across the nation. That way, you'll breed more Japanese people. But what do you expect from a government led by a room filled with dump-carrying senile old men? They don't represent the youths anyways. And let's not get started at how capitalist Japanese society is. Maximum output requires maximum work hours, so your life at home. Well, obviously, people wouldn't want to make kids because they wouldn't want to make time. Japan's politics is so out of touch with the public that it is pretty much just a retirement home for people who have plenty of money to spare. With a society so highly advanced yet socially restrictive in a sense that people always self-regulate against the change of the world, one day Japan is going to itself up in the ass. And the change is already here. Immigration problems, political instability, and an increasingly hedonistic and nihilist society. At least we still get some anime out of it. But if Japan is gone, where else can we find anime? Thank you for watching this episode of the Based Indonesian Show. Don't forget to leave a like and a comment down below to tell me what you think. And I will see you in the next episode of the Based Indonesian Show. Bye-bye, real people. Or Based Indonesians.
Subscribe to the Based Indonesian Show. Dijamin halal